When people ask me, what do Unitarian Universalists believe, I sometimes say that we believe in all the world's religions except for the one we grew up in. The reason is, the one we grew up in is the one we learned from human beings, warts and all, our parents, other adults in our lives, Sunday school teachers, and sometimes the religion we grew up in is the most difficult one and the one we need to heal from before we can benefit from the wisdom of. The other religions we may learn from books, and books they might be the best translations of the best books of that tradition. And so I think part of what we're talking about today is one of the principles of Unitarian Universalism, one of our sources, is the world's religions, which inspire us to lead ethical and spiritual lives. And so as we're reflecting on the world's religions, let's reflect not only on the ones we learned about through books, but the one we grew up in and the one we may need to heal from the most. The one I grew up in was the Episcopal Church and the Christian Church. And I remember I had a hard time healing from some experiences I had in it. And one day I was teaching Sunday school in a Unitarian Universalist church, and we had invited someone from the Hindu community to come speak to us. And after the class, he said to me, "Are you a Christian?" And I thought for a moment, and I hesitated for a moment, and then he filled in my silence with these words. He said, "You know, I always think that I'm a little bit Hindu, a little bit Buddhist, a little bit Christian, a little bit Jewish, a little bit Muslim. Are you sure you're not a little bit Christian?" Based on that question, I had to say, yes, I think I am a little bit. And this is sort of brings home the point of how we in the Unitarian Universalist Church draw wisdom from many different sources, making us a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of many different things. Once again, grounded in the wisdom tradition, where we can draw wisdom from many different sources. We might draw it from the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, the Muslim tradition, the Buddhist tradition, the Taoist tradition, from many different traditions. Now, this movement in our tradition had its origins in the 19th century in a movement called the Transcendentalists. It had people in it like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, the Peabody sisters. Many of these early Unitarian Universalists drew wisdom from many different sources. And if you think about it, in the Protestant movement, a revolutionary moment is when the Bible came into print and everyone could read it. Before, the priest would interpret it, read it to you and interpret it for you, and you would sort of listen to what the priest said. But then you could read the Bible with your own eyes. Well, in the 19th century, you could read many different world religion scriptures. You could buy it in a book. You could own it yourself. You could read the Analects of Confucius, the Tao Te Ching, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita. And suddenly people are starting to read these scriptures. And they're not only it's not just about us studying them or we are learning about others. People started reading them and they started drawing wisdom from them themselves, realizing there were insights in each one of these books. And so every couple of years, we take our youth group up to Boston for a Boston Heritage trip because a lot of Unitarian Universalist history is there. And we went out to Concord where we were going to visit Ralph Waldo Emerson's house, and then we were going to go out to Walden Pond and see Henry David Thoreau's, or a reenactment of his house that he built himself. And I was telling the kids about how Emerson and Thoreau read many of the different world's religions, and they were influenced by those world religions, and they have influenced other religions. For instance, Mahatma Gandhi, a Hindu leader, called Ralph Waldo Emerson his American guru. And he also learned a lot about civil disobedience. If you think about the movement for nonviolent change coming out of Gandhi in India, he learned a lot of that from Henry David Thoreau. And so I was telling the kids about how Thoreau and Emerson had learned about the world's religions and it influenced them as well as been influenced by them. And we decided to hike out to the original home site where Henry David Thoreau had built his house and reflected on nature and spirituality. And when we walked out and we got to that site, we discovered a group of Hindus were meditating there. And I was like, see, I told you so. So this is very real, that the transcendentalists learned from different religions, but also influenced different religions. Gandhi used to tell the story of a village in India where there was a Muslim well and there was a Hindu well. And a Hindu would never think about drinking from the Muslim well, and a Muslim would never think about drinking from the Hindu well. But as he pointed out, both were drinking the same water. The wells went down into the same underground stream. And so one of the models for thinking about religion is to think about them as competitive. It's like Coke or Pepsi or Burger King and McDonald's. They're competitors for a limited number of customers. Another way is to look at them like a well and say that they may be different structures and different places, but they're all tapping in to the same source. Another way to think about them is like flowers in one garden. Now, each flower may be different, might be have a different variety, diversity, different colors, different shapes, different sizes, but all are drawing nourishment from the same soil, the ground of all being. So you can look at how they're different, or you can look at how they are grounded in the same source. Another image that is used, that religions are like leaves of one tree. You can look at the different leaves and think of them as being different, or you can see that they're connected to the branches to one tree, one root system. So this is one of the images that is used. Gandhi used to say that he did not, in order to be faithful to the Hindu tradition, he did not have to disparage other traditions. He said it was like, I can be married to one person. That doesn't mean I have to, sort of say mean things or nasty things about the spouses of other people. I don't have to say, my wife is the best and yours are terrible. You can be faithful to your spouse and you can be faithful to your own tradition without disparaging others. That's an important principle in this tradition, Unitarian Universalist tradition. We can be faithful to our beliefs without having to disparage other people's beliefs. As we often say, we don't have to think alike in order to love alike. We don't have to think alike in order to have compassion for each other. When I was in college, I remember listening to an interview with the Dalai Lama of Tibet, and the person interviewing him said, how do you feel about the Chinese? I mean, they invaded your country and they tore down your temples and they killed a lot of people, and many people say they've destroyed your culture. How can you forgive them? How can you have compassion for them? And the Dalai Lama said, well, I like to think of my enemy as my teacher. If you want to learn kindness, or you want to learn how to be patient, you can't learn that from someone who's easygoing or really easy to get along with. If you want to learn patience, you got to have a real rascal, a real adversary. And so our adversaries are our teachers. They help us become more patient. And I remember thinking as I was listening to this, how come I have to learn more about the Sermon on the Mount from a Buddhist? That this Buddhist teacher was giving me insight into the Christian tradition. And this is another thing about the world's religions. If you don't see them as competitors, but you see them as they can enhance each other, that you can enhance your own faith by learning about another faith. If you go to China and you say to someone, are you Confucius, or are you Taoist, or are you Buddhist? They might say yes, because in the East it's common to draw wisdom from different traditions. It's not as, you don't have to see them as competitors or competing. Any tradition that has insight in it is one that you can benefit from. And that's one of the things that we try to teach. Behind me is a painting from Norman Rockwell called The Golden Rule. And some version of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or do not do to others what you would not want them to do to you, some version of the golden rule exists in all the world's religions. And there's a giant painting of the golden rule that's in the United Nations building in New York City. A reminder that what holds us together, people of all faiths, all over the world, the common ground we share is the desire to treat each other the way we would want to be treated. So early Unitarians read the Upanishads, and they found reinforcement of something they already believed. The early Unitarians often spoke of a divine spark within every person. And what you hear in the Upanishads, that's called Atman and Brahman. God within you connects you to the God around you. The greeting is Namaste. The God in me sees and honors the God in you. So there is this idea that the Unitarians found in one tradition, but they see it echoed in many other traditions. Another important thing to remember is you can sometimes see someone practicing a faith that seems very different from your own faith and one you would not want to practice. And sometimes you can think of a faith as medicine. And sometimes people have an allergic reaction to a medicine. So I might take a medicine and it heals me and it makes me better, but if someone else were to take it, it might poison them, might make them sick or make them want to die. And so a religion is like this in the sense that each one of us needs to find the right prescription, the right one that works for us. And you don't necessarily have to judge someone. If someone's doing something that would be deadly for me, doesn't mean it might not be life-giving for them, that there's room for diversity. Leo Tolstoy once told a story about magic rings. He said there was once a person who made a magic ring, and anybody who put on that ring would become more loving and more compassionate and more kind. But one day, the man dropped the ring into a box that had other rings in it, and he couldn't figure out which ring was the correct ring, which ring was the magic ring, and which one was just ordinary rings. And eventually, he decided that whatever ring he put on, if he became more loving and more passionate, or more compassionate and more kind, then that must be the right ring. And so it is with religion. If a religion makes us kinder and more compassionate and more forgiving and more merciful, then that must be the right religion. I had a friend, Joe Shukla, who was a member of the Hindu Community Center, and a friend gave him a copy of the Upanishads with this inscription in it. He said, "Toward your metamorphosis into who knows what." And that's what spirituality is. It's about a metamorphosis into who knows what. But if we get it right, it's a metamorphosis into someone who is kinder, and more compassionate, and more merciful. So may it be.